What do you love about being outside and active?
I'm sure I've spent more time outdoors than in. That just feels like home.
Enjoy what you can do, because you never know what is around the corner.
Just being outdoors in the fresh air, it just clears my mind.
Fully immersed in nature is what brings me the most joy.
Welcome back to a brand new season of the Outside and Active podcast, where this week my very special guest is Sir Chris Hoy. Sir Chris Hoy is one of Great Britain's most successful Olympic athletes, with 6 gold medals and 1 silver to his name. Chris won his first Olympic gold medal in Athens in 2004 in the kilo, an event that was actually later dropped for Beijing in 2008. But Chris took this in his stride and actually switched his attention to 3 other track sprint events: the Keirin, sprint and team sprint. And not only did he switch his attention to these events, he went on to win gold medal in all 3 of them, cementing his name in the Olympic history books. In 2008, he was voted the BBC Personality of the Year, and in 2009 was awarded with a knighthood in the New Year's Honours List. And in this episode of the Outside and Active podcast, we chat to Chris a lot about what psychologically has to go into being a successful athlete, and why this element of his preparation and training was actually so fundamental into making him the success that he was. If you're new around here, then please make sure to rate and follow the podcast and forward it on to someone who you think would enjoy it just as much as you. Before we jump into the episode, I just want to say that over on outsideandactive.com, if you click shop, we are doing a special end of summer sale. Head over there now and get yourself a fantastic bargain. Thank you to dryrobe for supporting this episode. We'll chat a little bit more about them later. But until then, let's get straight into this conversation with Sir Chris Hoy. Hello, welcome to the Outside and Active podcast, where today I'm extremely excited to be joined by Sir Chris Hoy. How are you doing this morning?
I'm very well. I'm a bit groggy. I've just I got back late last night. I was up in Edinburgh, so I had to drive up to Edinburgh and back again. So it was 9 hours of driving. And but yeah, good way to start the day. Get on a podcast.
Yeah,
and,
get talking.
Ease my way down. Have a cup of coffee. So yeah, all good.
I'm joining you with that as well. We've got our coffee going and we're ready to chat about all things outside and active. But just before that, we're going to kick it off with something that I do on every episode, and that is offering you a piece of advice that someone who's been on as a guest leaves, and they don't know who they're leaving it for. So this piece of advice comes from ultra runner Priya Gopaldas, and her advice is quite simply to smile through the pain. And I'm sure there's numerous times you've had to do this in competitions and stuff like that, but I'm interested of how you take that advice.
And that's really good advice, and it's actually it strikes a chord with me, because our psychologist Steve Peters used to talk about the importance of smiling in stressful situations. So he, not just on a daily basis for your own good, but he said, don't forget to smile when you turn up at the venue on race day. When you walk into the velodrome, have a massive smile on your face. He said there's all the physiological benefits of smiling, the releasing of positive, happy hormones into your body. He said, but the main benefit is that your rivals will see you smiling and will think, why on earth is he so happy and confident? And he said, you'll have a double benefit. You'll benefit yourself, and you're going to psych out your opponents as well. But yeah, on a kind of, he was half joking but half serious about that, but also talking about the benefit of smiling. Just trying to remind yourself to enjoy what you're doing, and remind yourself that actually you're choosing to be here at this competition. It's not a burden. It can feel like a burden at times when you turn up at a major championship and you're just, I guess, it feels like it's life and death. And really it's keeping it in perspective and understanding that it's not, and reminding yourself, trying to remind yourself why you took cycling in the first place. You know, it was a hobby. It was a fun thing. You never thought you could take it to that point. You'd be competing in Olympic Games or a World Championship. So
you're going to be there, enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's great advice. Smile through the pain. I like it.
Interesting bringing up sports psychology. Was that important throughout your career? Was it something that maybe became more important as your career developed?
Yeah, it definitely, it was quite late on. So I was probably 27 or 28 before I started working with Steve. And before then, well, there was nothing else on offer, so that was the reason why I hadn't worked with one. But equally, when he first turned up with the team, there was a definite stigma attached to seeing a psychologist, you know, which is ridiculous. 20 years ago, it's not that long ago, but it was a different lifetime in terms of attitude towards mental health and towards even just the psychological preparation for sport. So it took a couple of the big name riders to go and meet him and chat to him, and then come back and go, wow, that was really helpful and a really quite interesting. And then you suddenly go, all right, well, maybe I'll have a chat too. And then before you know it, everybody's there. The mechanics, the coaches,
everyone's in.
The receptionist, everybody's knocking on his door and wanting to chat to him. So, I mean, Steve's an amazing guy, but I think any psychological support can help you. It's not just, I think people assume you're going in there talking about very specific, sport-specific things. And yes, you do. You have strategies for coping with specific situations and things that might be holding you back. But it's often just getting perspective and getting your life balances right and making sure that you're happy in yourself. Going back to smiling, it's important. And if you do tend to find that if everything in your life, or if your home life, if your relationships, if everything's going well, then it reflects on your bike, your training and your performance, and kind of vice versa. It's all linked. And Steve was a massive part of my sporting performance.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I was listening to an interview with Stuart Broad the other day, who's just retired from cricket, who said, I was offered it later in my career, and I felt like I didn't need it because I know there was nothing wrong. I was doing fine, but actually, when he did eventually go, okay, I will go and speak to someone and talk about anything, it actually found that it helped him, even though he didn't necessarily think there was anything he could improve on going into it. When he came out of it, it was a massive benefit.
Yeah, I think that the notion is that it's a sign of weakness. It's a sign that if you're going to see a psychologist, it's like you're admitting that there's a chink in your armor and you're not mentally strong enough to cope with pressure situations, or it's like, no, I can deal with it, I'm fine. And that's the similar story there with Stuart Broad. I think it's understanding that, well, if you can find an improvement or any way of coping with a situation better, then why would you not take that advice, or even just go and chat and see if there is something, and there might not be. But for me, it was, in the end, it was really useful, particularly leading up to London in 2012 and dealing with the additional perceived pressures of being at home games and the expectation. But Steve, he just helped change my outlook on a lot of things, which you can then apply to the rest of your life. But I think a lot of people are just either a bit nervous or a bit unsure, and they think, no, I don't need that, or I don't want to sort of, open that box. I just want to, I'm fine as I am. But I think, like anything else, the ability to deal with pressure, the ability to focus under pressure is a skill. So some people tend to be better at it than others inherently, but that doesn't mean that somebody who stresses or who worries or who, has had problems in the past with coping with pressure, that they can't improve, because they can. There's basic things that you can do and you can practice to improve for those situations. The hard thing is that we don't have, or most of us don't have, a daily life where you have these really big moments happening all the time. So you sit down and you chat about how you're going to deal with, how you're going to choose to react to a certain situation, and you talk through it when you're sitting calmly like we are now, a cup of coffee in hand, hypothetical situations. And it's all, that makes complete sense. And then it comes to a moment where you really are stressed. And it's like Steve used to talk about the chimp, the emotional part of your brain. The chimp would get out of the cage and would start kind of getting stressed, and that's the hard part. That's the bit when you recognize, is reminding yourself, this is the time I need to apply all these learnings and all these things that we've discussed. And it's difficult to sort of step back and go, I can see I'm behaving in a way which isn't helpful here. Let's, use the things we talked about, recognize that. And it takes time like anything else. You don't go into a gym and pick up a dumbbell and lift it once and get strong straight away. And the same with psychologists. You don't go and see them once and go, oh, well, that's that fixed. You have to practice it, and there are techniques you have to use on a daily basis. So it does take time, but it's worth the effort.
Just going to jump in this conversation with Sir Chris to chat a little bit about our friends at Dryrobe, who have been supporting the Outside and Active podcast for a very, very long time. Get changed and stay warm with the Dryrobe Advanced, the world's warmest and most versatile change robe. Designed to let you get changed anywhere, the weatherproof outer protects you from the elements, while the super warm lining helps you dry quickly. Perfect for all outdoor activities, from elite sporting events to family camping adventures. And even better, it's made with 100% recycled fabrics. To check out the full range of Dryrobe products, visit dryrobe.com. Well, let me step back out and ask you a question that I ask to everyone that comes on, and it's purposefully vague because I like to see where people go with it. But what do you love about being outside and active?
What do I love about it? Well, I guess it's changed over the years. Now, for me, it's about, I think, again, going back to the psychology stuff, it's about gaining perspective and seeing how small you are and how insignificant any of the things that are stressing you out are. When you're in, I think the pandemic really magnified it. When you're stuck in one place, you're in a small confined area, and it just magnifies issues that you have, any problems or any stresses or anything at all, anything that's annoying you. It can really start to sort of marinate those problems. So once you get out and you get some space and you go out for a ride on your bike and you see how, you ride in beautiful countryside, but with a bit of space, some big hills, you get a high point, you look down and you see how insignificant you are, and you kind of go, this is quite a nice feeling to realize actually nothing's worth getting that stressed about. You get the physical benefit of the exercise, you get the mental benefit of being outdoors and time to think and time to reflect. But there's nothing quite like that feeling of, that's a little moment. You usually hopefully get it at least once in a ride, of just thinking, I'm lucky to be here. I can't, I want to savor this moment, because it's, usually we're all so busy and we're in such a rush to get stuff done and squeezed into a day. It's that moment where you kind of go, yeah, this is lovely, and I'm glad I'm here doing this. I'm glad I chose to do this.
How has your relationship with fitness and exercise changed, especially in the sort of the last 10 years since you've retired?
It's changed a lot, really. It used to be all about numbers. It used to be all about data. It used to all be about, a session was just another step towards an end goal, and it was all about the data. So I still enjoyed I loved what I was, being a cyclist, being a track cyclist. I absolutely loved it, and it was my passion, and that's why I managed to do it until I was 36. I kept going because of my joy of riding my bike, not just because I like winning races. You get a lot of people that they can win once, or they can win a couple of years in a row, but to maintain that, you have to genuinely love doing what you're doing. So I did love my cycling, but I think I've appreciated it more since I've retired, because when you don't have to focus on the numbers, you don't have to stress about whether it was a good or a bad session and what the next session is. You just appreciate it for what it is. And you miss it when you can't squeeze it in. So there's lots of times where you don't have the time to go out and do a ride for a couple of hours. But things like Zwift, it's not the great outdoors, obviously, but it's, I guess in a way, it's your mind, sort of tricking your mind to think you are outdoors. That's why I think it's successful. It's a platform that allows people to feel as if they are almost getting that, virtual world of getting outside when they're stuck in their garage or wherever. So I think just being active every day, trying to have at least half an hour of activity, physical activity every day, makes a difference. And then you can maintain a certain level of fitness, so that when you do have the chance to go out and do a full day and or a charity ride, or a big thing that's going to take a fair bit of physical effort, you're physically ready for it, and you're not sort of struggling to get up those hills, because people love to they always still want to try and beat you up the hill, or
of course.
beat you up the hill so they can tell their pals. But I love it. I still, and even more now that my kids are old enough to cycle. So my kids are 5 and 8, and there's nothing I enjoy more than just getting out on the bike with them. I went down to there's like a really cool place just on the outskirts of Manchester, and it's got a BMX pump track. It's got little mountain bike trails. There is a flat area that's all marked out with kind of road markings for kids to ride their bikes, to learn, the kind of the rules of the road, and giveaway signs and roundabouts and all that sort of stuff. It's amazing. And it's huge, and it's free, and it's open 24/7, and it's like a mecca for kids on their bikes, and for adults too, I suppose. So I took them down there last week for the first time, and we've been going back almost every day. So I love riding my bike now for all kinds of reasons, but it's very different to the old days where it was just this relentless, the training was brutal, and every day it was about the numbers, and you'd reflect after every session, whether it was good or a bad session, and your day could be, make or break based on 100th of a second. So you go home and you have your dinner and sitting there feeling a bit glum because your flying 100-meter time was 100th of a second slower than you hoped it would be.
Crazy when you think about it like that.
Yeah.
But like you said, when people are challenging you up those hills, do you still retain that slight competitive edge at all?
I'd like to say that I've matured and I'm able to just go, no, on you go, mate. Well done, But no, there's still that fire that it's kind of, it's not as bright as it used to be, but there's still that competitive instinct, which when it comes out, it can be a bit embarrassing. But I try to rein it in and try to kind of understand there's a time and a place. But every now and again, I do get a bit competitive, and I do a bit of motorsport as a hobby, and I race cars, so that I have that little kind of competitive outlet. That's quite helpful for getting rid of those embarrassing competitive moments.
Yeah, well, you took part in the Le Mans 24 in 2016. And as like you said, as a fan of motorsport, that must have been an incredible experience.
Oh, it was incredible. It really was. It was my dream to get to Le Mans, and that was, as an amateur driver, that is kind of the pinnacle of what you can achieve. So to be racing alongside, former Formula One drivers and some of your absolute motorsport heroes, and to be doing it on such a iconic circuit with so many amazing stories, so many historic moments have taken place there over the years. It was quite bizarre. But yeah, I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Drawing on what you said a bit earlier about being able to enjoy the feeling of cycling more, I suppose that when you're going to events now, you've just come back from the Cycling World Champs, you're approaching events in a different way. You're there to watch and spectate and sometimes be a pundit on as well. How does your relationship with cycling and these events change? Do you kind of go back and go, oh, I can appreciate it for what it is now? Or is it kind of like you miss certain elements of it?
You still miss those moments. I don't know if you call it missing. I think it allows you the self-indulgent opportunity just to reflect on some really cool parts of your career. So when you see someone like Emma Finucane winning her world title, age 20, in front of a home crowd, and that the sort of shock, and she goes up to the family and the tears, and you allow yourself that moment to go, I remember 2008 in Manchester, my first world title in the sprint, and how it felt, and you kind of it's lovely to be there because time moves on, times get faster, equipment improves, it's relentless improvement in sport. But what doesn't change are the emotions and the feelings and the pressures as well, and this, the same head-to-head battles. That nothing changes there. So what they're going through, good and bad, and you can reflect and look back on your own career. But in terms of being a fan, it's you see things differently, and also just appreciating. As an athlete, you're so self-centered and you're so focused on what you're doing and your own needs and your own schedule that the world kind of happens around you. You're not looking out, you're looking in the whole time. And when you're a pundit or when you're on the other side of the fence, you can appreciate how much work goes into putting on an event like the Cycling World Championships, where you've got all these different disciplines together. Absolutely mammoth task, this huge logistical challenge. And I think they did an absolutely amazing job. It was, as a fan and as a sort of pundit, I had a brilliant time. I thought it was an amazing show they put on. I don't know quite how they managed to do it, but and Glasgow shut down the city centre for over a week, and the public really didn't grumble that much. I used the taxi drivers as a good barometer of kind of public opinion.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, it's causing a bit of difficulty, but it's good to see, and it's good for the city, and it's good for Glasgow, and and they're chatting about Katie Archibald, and they're chatting about Jack Carlin, and they're chatting about all kinds of people, and you think this is really good, and there were more people on bikes, just general folk riding around on bikes, and just I love the way that Glasgow got behind it in a time when, just out the back of a pandemic, everybody's purse strings are a bit tight. But they've realised the importance of sport, the importance of investing in sport, and how these big moments, these big sporting moments, do make a difference. And there'll always be people to sort of go, it's cost too much, or it's this, or it's that. But the net benefit economically, from a health perspective for the whole nation, I think it's so important that we keep having these events that do have a long-lasting effect. You know, London 2012, we're still talking about it. Well, I'm still talking about it because I was part of it. But, yeah, I think it's great to see Scotland getting behind it and really, you know, setting the bar high for the first ever combined cycling world champs.
Well, it's events like that will inspire people to even just get on a bike and cycle to and from work. You know, which, like you said, the benefits that come from that in itself is incredible. And I mean, just from the event, GB did incredibly well in the cycling, the paracycling tables as well, which was fantastic. How do you look at obviously a year or so away from Paris, how do you look at the landscape of cycling in GB at the moment?
I think it's looking really rosy. I think what's nice is the strength and depth across the board. It's not just the track team, say, that are dominating, or a couple of big names that are, you know, grabbing all the headlines. There's strength and depth across all the disciplines. You've got, you know, Tom Pidcock in the mountain biking. You've got Bethany Shriever in the BMX racing. You've got you know, on the track side, you've got a whole host of big names that are dominating there. You've got the para athletes who are relentless in their medal winning successes. You know, pretty much every, you know, Grand Tours, you know, you switch on any Grand Tour and there's going to be a Brit up there fighting for the podium. It's still, I think, it's to me, I think it's due to, so you work it back 10, 15, 20 years. And once you have role models, once you have people who are winning from your country, you can see, well, they went to the same club that I went to, or they trained at the same track, or they raced the national championships here at Fort William, you know, and I've seen them in the flesh, and they are normal people, and that you have something to aspire to, then you can emulate that. But it's when there's this big gap where there weren't so many, we had talented riders, but they weren't getting the support.
Yeah.
You know, when I was starting racing, there was, in sprint terms, the last really successful sprinter in Britain was Reg Harris, who was, I think, world sprint champion back in the 1950s. So, you know, we didn't have anybody to sit and watch on a weekly basis at track league, or we had guys in Scotland who were breaking through and making it onto the British team, and they were my sort of heroes and my kind of role models. But when you got to international level, you assumed that you were going to get beaten because, well, we were kind of a Z-list nation in terms of sprinting. So once you can break through that, once you can get riders, or even one rider winning, then someone else can think, well, I can do that.
Domino effect.
And it was really Jason Quealy who won the Kilo in 2000 in Sydney. He was the one who got me to open my eyes and think, wow, it's just Jason, you know, no disrespect, but, you know, he's a normal guy. He's like, you know, he's like me. So I think, well, wow, if he can be an Olympic champion, maybe I could make it into the top 10, or maybe I could sort of, just by training with him, get kind of dragged along on his coattails and learn from him. And it helped me massively. So once you have these riders winning and doing well, it gets the momentum going. As long as the funding is still there, as long as there's support for those riders, they have the facilities, if they have the coaching, then I think it's not quite self-perpetuating. You still have to put a huge amount of work in there, but the future is definitely bright.
Gives opportunity, definitely. And I'm glad a little bit earlier you were talking about different cycling disciplines, because there will be people listening to this that, of course, will know cycling like the back of their hand, but there will also be some of our regular listeners that may be thinking, oh yeah, I've watched cycling at the Olympics, and there's some of them where they're just not cycling around. They're going really slowly and they're going back and forth. What are the different cycling disciplines? I know there's so many, but potentially... How long
have we got here? Because, you know, it's only a 1 hour podcast, isn't it? But
some of the more prominent ones that you were involved in.
Yeah, so the ones, I was a sprinter, and I used to take part in the kilometre time trial, I guess, is the most simple one. One rider on the track against the clock, 4 laps. So 1,000 metres as fast as you can. In the old days, there was no heats or qualifying, just one ride. So you would turn up on race day, a bit like Christmas morning. You don't really know what you're going to get until you unwrap the present. And, you know, you just hope that you've done the training's done the job and that you're going to be able to produce the goods. And it was done in reverse order of seeding. So the best riders would go at the end. So the times would get faster and faster and faster. So there was the mental stress as well. If you were last to go, sitting there watching your rivals post these amazing times, questioning if you could beat them, and trying to focus on yourself. And that was actually, as a really simple event, it was one of the best events, and it's no longer an Olympic event, unfortunately, but I think it should be. Then you have the sprint, which is the kind of cat and mouse, 2 riders on the track, where it's just 3 laps of the track. First one across the line wins, dead simple. But because of aerodynamics and because of tactics, you don't necessarily want to be at the front, and hence you get this slow kind of build up, and then with about a lap and a half to go, that's when the real sprint begins. You have the Keirin, which is the one with at the start, there's a guy on a little motorised bike who's a pacer, and you all line up behind him, and the race begins with 3 laps to go. When the pacer swings off, that's when you're allowed to start sprinting. And the reason for the pacer is it keeps everyone together in a group, and he brings the pace up to about 55, 60 kilometres an hour, and then you race from that pace there. And I do the team sprint as well, which is a 3-person race, a 3-person team event, and you start together. The first rider does 1 lap and then peels off, finishes their race. The rest of the 2 following riders continue on for the next lap. One of those riders then drops out, and you've got 1 guy left on the track at the end to do the final lap. And that's a kind of head-to-head race with 2 teams. So that was the sprint side. And then there's about 1 million endurance, which even as a commentator and a pundit, when you're on the TV with the Madisons like a 2-person event, and it's like a relay where but instead of passing a baton, you just basically grab the person's hand and sling them into the race. So one of you's racing and one of you's recovering at any one time. So there's bodies everywhere, all over the track. There's like about 20 teams or 25 teams, which means you've got 50 people up on the track, and it's chaotic. So, yeah, I won't even begin to try and explain about the rules on the endurance side of things.
No, I think you've done a great job.
But once you get into it, even as a viewer at home, it can seem really complicated, but you've got guys like Simon Brotherton, Chris Boardman, who do the commentary for BBC, who are brilliant, and they will kind of explain it. And once you get into it, it's like anything. If there's nuanced things involved in a sport, once you understand those rules and those little kind of quirks, and you become a sort of sofa expert, then you can really enjoy it. And
it's fantastic viewing.
Yeah.
And you said there, 2004, the kilo was great for you, very successful for you, but then it was dropped afterwards, and you had to switch your attention to other things. Is that mentally quite difficult as well as physically, or obviously there's elements you can take forward?
Physically, it wasn't too much of a challenge, or it was a challenge, but I was a sprinter, and I had the sprint physiology to adapt to different events. But you're right, mentally was the hardest part. I was nearly 30 at the time, 29 going on 30, when I got the news that the event that I'd won my first Olympic gold medal in was going to be dropped from the next Olympic Games. So I was a year into training for Beijing, got the call, and it was just an absolute body blow, because people are already sort of going, you're 29 going on 30, this must be your last games, and your age is brought up all the time in terms of interviews and stuff. So you're questioning whether you can even make it at the best of times, and then your event's dropped, and you're thinking, well, there's no way I can change events now. There's not enough time. The kilo is a very controlled, one-dimensional event. It's all about your physical strength, and you do have to have mental strength too, as I said before, about focusing on yourself and blocking out distractions. But there's no tactics, there's no variability in what you're doing. But the sprint and the Keirin are highly unpredictable events, because tactics are a major part of it. So at that point, it was, do you retire? And I was Commonwealth champion, world champion, Olympic champion. I'd achieved way more than I ever imagined was possible. I could have walked away happy with what I had, but it was just around about the time that they dropped the kilo from the Olympic program that they announced that London would be the host for 2012. And even though it was 7 years away at the time, I was like, it was too big a carrot on the horizon. I thought, well, I've got to try. I can't quit now. It's unlikely I'll make it to those games, but I've got to give it a shot. So that was enough of an incentive. And I started training, and the biggest benefit was, I guess the team realised that we had a bit of a hole in the coaching, a gap in the coaching for a proper tactical coach, someone who really knew track sprinting like the back of their hand. And there was a guy called Jan van Eyden, who was world champion in 2000 for Germany. And he self-confessed, he would say he wasn't the fastest guy out there. So when he won the Worlds, he qualified 12th. He was like 2/10 off the winning time. But his tactics and his ability to read a race won him that title. He was incredible to watch. He could control a race. He could stall his opponent. He could leave. He knew how to ride it. And so we thought he was the best tactician on the track. So let's see if we can get him to come and explain what he used to do on the track to us. So he retired straight into coaching, took to it like a duck to water, and he really helped me to make that transition into sprinting and Keirin racing. And he just broke it down and made it really simple. And I had to sit at home and do hours of studying of videos. I used to come home from training, make my dinner, and instead of putting on Netflix, or I wasn't Netflix back then, but instead of putting on a DVD or something, it was just more homework. It was watching races, understanding what's happening, and it was. I couldn't have imagined that it would have made the transition as smooth as he did. But yeah, he was a great coach and made it really simple.
And not only did that, then not only were you at the games in 2012, you were the flag bearer. How does that added privilege? Even just going into a home games as well. Obviously, we spoke at the beginning about smiling through the pain and pressure. Were you able to enjoy it? Or did you feel that extra maybe little bit on your shoulders?
It was tough. So I got 3 golds in Beijing, which was a good lesson from the whole Beijing and the kilo being dropped, and that transition was. I would never have done it out of choice. I would never have chosen to step away from my event that I was world champion and Olympic champion in, to see if I was better at 2 other additional individual events and the team sprint. But I was forced into it, and it was the worst case scenario, and it was awful. But having done all that, having dealt with that change, I realized that, looking back, well, there was opportunity there. And, with change comes opportunity. So, I went to Beijing, won 3 gold medals. It was unbelievable. Like you had to sort of stop at the end of it and reflect and think, my God, how did that happen? That's 3 years ago, you wouldn't have put £5 on that happening. It was so unlikely. And then, as you say, you go into London, and all of a sudden, because you won 3 gold medals at the previous games, you are going to be one of the bigger names and one of the people that everyone's expecting. And as you say, I got to carry the flag, and that added even more attention and expectation. And therefore, it was all about how do you cope with that? Because some people will fold under that and some people will deal with it. And I was lucky that I had Steve Peters. So going back to Steve, we spent so much time working on understanding or trying to deal with the stress and the pressure and the fact I was going to be 36 in London. So I was definitely getting towards the end of my physical shelf life, and trying not to dwell on that, but to understand, right, we have to, everything has to be perfect. You've got to really look after your body. You've got to, the recovery is absolutely vital. Your diet, your rest, your sleep, but psychologically too, you can drain yourself if you're stressing about stuff. It can become exhausting. So the biggest thing we dealt with was perspective and understanding that this is not a burden to be the flag bearer. This is not a burden to have a home audience. This is not a burden. This is an opportunity. And that word opportunity was just kind of repeated. It was almost like a mantra. The pressure, you can't measure pressure. It's not like in terms of competition. It's all within you. It's how you perceive it. So what one person perceives to be a high pressure situation, someone else goes, this is brilliant. Yeah, I can't wait for this. This is exciting. So it's trying to change your mindset so that you perceive that situation as, wow, I'm so lucky. I can't wait to get out there. What an amazing thing to be part of. Instead of coming out going, oh my God, they all expect me to win because I won last time. And oh no, I'm carrying the flag. I've got even more attention now. And so it was about changing that mindset and choosing to see it as an opportunity and realizing that what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're not going to win a bike race. The world is not going to stop revolving. It's not life and death. You still have 4 Olympic gold medals from the last 2 games. They can't take those away. You've won them. You're not going to lose them if you don't win this race. So go out there and enjoy it. You can only add to the experience. And if you go through it fearing it and worrying about it and stressing about it, at the end of it, you look back and regret that you didn't embrace it more. So it was just a lot of work about perspective and trying to, understand what you have control over and what you don't have control over. So if you can just focus entirely on all the fuss around you, that's great, but you don't need to engage in all that.
Yeah.
What I need to do, I need to make sure that in the 5 or 6 days that I'm in the village before a race, that my recovery, my sleep, my diet, my training are all spot on, that my energy levels are high, that I'm not allowing myself to get emotionally drained by stuff. Switch off social media. I didn't engage with Twitter, or, well, there was no Instagram back then, but yeah, Twitter was the thing. Because you could read 1,000 messages that are all positive and you read one that's negative, and that little seed of doubt goes into your head. So just switch it off. Why even bother engaging with it? And I look back now, and I'm so glad that I was able to go into those games with that mindset, because I had it was, don't get me wrong, it wasn't sort of like I sort of waltzed in there and had a great time. It was stressful, and you felt the pressure and you felt the adrenaline and nerves, but in a good way. And it all kind of melted away just as I got onto the bike on the start line. Once you're in that, in your office, in that position of familiarity, when you sit in the bike and you're on the start line, you go, right, I'm ready for this now. And the stress is the bit that comes up to that point. But once you're on the bike, you switch on mentally, and that's what you're trained to do. And the race for the Keirin was just, it was, again, the Keirin is, for those that aren't into track cycling, it's a sport that originated in Japan as a gambling sport. It's a very unpredictable sport. So there's 6 of you in the final, and anybody in that final could legitimately be a winner. There's favourites, but really anyone can win. So there's no guarantees. And it worked out, and I look back now with great fondness on that. For that whole period of time, it was amazing. Yeah,
you used it all as a step up rather than, I think I said, pressure coming down on your shoulders. It was all dragging you along.
Exactly.
And then the year later, 2013, you retired. Is that like a natural? Was that a plan? Was that something that you knew maybe that was coming to the end?
Yeah, I knew that I was kind of hanging on by my fingernails to get to London. Really, my body was picking up injuries all the time, and I knew that nothing was quite going to match up to a home Olympics. So I think that I knew it was my last Olympics. The one I would have loved to have done the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2014, but my body just wasn't really up for it. It was, I had a break after London, got back to training, and it was just back problems, knee problems. And I thought, you know what, I'd rather just not turn up there, patched together and held together with bits of tape. I want to be, if I'm not going to be physically 100%, then there's no point in doing it. So, but I had a plan before. I was always a big believer in having a plan and knowing where you're going, having a goal, having every day having a purpose. And once you have that, I think when you have a plan and you know where you're going, you don't have to worry about the long term. You just focus on today. What is my mission today to help me take that step forward to the next step tomorrow, the day after. So 2013, retired, and had a plan for things that I wanted to do and wanted to achieve. Because it can be a difficult time for athletes when they retire. No matter how long or short your career has been, it's the end of an era, and your identity as a sports person is over, and you have to look to the future.
Your schedule changes, I imagine, from 1 week to the next. It goes from regimented routine to your own sort of will.
So you would know every single day. Like I would be able to tell you 3 months from now on what day we're now. Tuesday morning would be probably be a road ride actually Tuesday morning for an hour, and then it would be a 3-hour track session in the afternoon. It would probably be speed on a Tuesday afternoon, and it was so predictable, and you got into this routine and you kind of latch onto it, and then you, as you say, you go into a life where the routine is, well, there is no routine because every week is different. And therefore, that's when my exercise, that's when my cycling, my gym, whatever I'm doing becomes the constant. That's the one thing that's constant. I'll make sure I do something every day, because you could be, literally, you could be flying somewhere for work. You could be going somewhere it could be TV work. It could be work with your business. You could make bikes. It could be podcasts, it could be writing a book, it could be, appearing on a show, whatever it is. It's just every week was different, and therefore I needed a constant, and my exercise, my cycling and gym became the one sort of constant.
Well, yeah, just picking up on a couple of those things just before we finish. The Hoy bikes is something you're passionate about, wanting to go and create your own bike, and also the podcast you kind of just brought up, Sporting Misadventures as well, where you speak to a whole host of people about their own sporting experiences. They're things that you have the freedom to be able to choose that what you want to do. Yeah,
that's what's nice about it, I think, is that you have a blank canvas when you retire, and it's a bit like the cycling. What do you have a passion for? And I've gone from doing one thing to the nth degree to now doing a number of things and having a bit more balance in my life. But the podcast, as an example, I love comedy. So I thought, how can I sort of manufacture a situation where I get to meet lots of my comedy heroes? Well, we could do a podcast maybe, and but yeah, basically it's just comedians come on and talk about their sporting highs and lows, and it's brilliant, and it's people that I've been an admirer of for many years, and you email them and you miraculously get an email back saying, yeah, sure, when do you want to do it? And you're like, brilliant. So it's been good fun, that. And the Hoy bikes is something that we've been doing for 10 years now, and we're about to hopefully take it in to another level soon. Can't really talk about it yet, but hopefully we'll have an announcement relatively soon. And I think whatever I do, I try to do it properly. I try to do it authentically. I don't just put my name to stuff. I try to get into it and give it my all and enjoy it and get the most from it, because I guess I don't know if we're going to have the advice bit yet, but I can do it now, or do you want to?
Let's do it. If we're in the theme of it, let's go. Your piece of advice.
Yeah. Well, the piece of advice is, and it's something, and it's a really sort of, it might sound a bit bland, but I've kind of used it through my whole life, and it's something that my grandma said to me. I used to live with my grandparents in Edinburgh, and with my parents, the whole lot of us together. And my grandma used to say, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing properly. So if you're going to do something, if you choose to do it, then do it with all your passion, all your effort. Throw yourself at it. Don't do something half-heartedly. So either do it or don't do it, but give it your all. So it was the little things. I remember we had the front doorstep in our house was brass, and to get my pocket money, I had to polish the brasses on a Sunday morning, and I was pretty young, and I did a really half-arsed job. And my grandma came out, and she's like, "Is that the best you can do?" I was like, "Yeah, can I have my 50p kind of thing?" And she said, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing properly. Come on, you'll feel at the end of it, you'll look at those brasses and you'll think, oh, they're shining and they look great. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she made me redo them, and I finished. And I did stand back and go, I'm proud of that. That was worth doing. And it was just a little thing, which then sort of the seed was planted about the importance of doing a job properly, give it your all. And you not just about the end result, but the process of doing it. You enjoy the process of doing it more. You take pride in your work. So yeah, have fun at what you do and give it your all.
That's good advice. I look forward to passing that along. And just a final question. You played rugby when you were younger. I'm assuming you're still a rugby fan. The Rugby World Cup is coming up very soon. What are your thoughts and opinions?
Well, obviously Scotland are going to win, aren't they?
Well, it won't be England.
Well, yeah, I guess the benefit England have is that no one's expecting them to do anything, and that's when a team's dangerous. But it's whether they believe they can do it or not is another question, another matter. But yeah, Scotland are in a pretty tough group, and it's they're up against it. But I think it's wide open. I think that's when it's quite exciting. When it's I remember back in the day when the World Cup started back, was it the 1990s?
New Zealand.
And and New Zealand were just. It was so predictable. There were very few surprises. They always ran to form. The teams were just so dominant that there was very few matches that were ever in question. But now it's amazing. So yeah, can't wait.
Well, we look forward to that, and I look forward to passing your advice along. So Chris, thank you very much for coming on and talking to me.
Thank you. Great to chat.
And that brings us to the end of the first episode in season 11 of the Outside and Active podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Sir Chris Hoy for coming on to the podcast as a guest. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I had having it. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, if you think you know someone who would enjoy it just as much as you, then forward it over to them. Let's grow this Outside and Active community. And also don't forget, over on outsideandactive.com on the shop, we are running a full end of summer sale on every single product. So make sure not to miss out on that. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Outside and Active podcast. I've been Dominic Brown, and until next time, enjoy the outdoors.